in the Netherlands, the year 2019 brings to mind not so much Zwingli as the anniversary of 400 years since the Synod of Dort began, 1618-1619. At this national synod also delegates from Zürich were present, among whom Johann Jacob Reitinger, who in his diary calls himself Zwingli's successor, the seventh in line. Synod had ended the year 1618 with a sermon by Johannes Paul on Isaiah 52, how beautiful are on the mountains the feet of those who bring glad tidings. And since we have no mountains in the Netherlands, we brought the Swiss over here. That 1st of January 1619 was, as Reitinger wrote, the day on which 100 years ago the most merciful God began to bring the most wholesome light of the gospel to our beloved Patria Zürich by Zwingli. And he then lists the names of 14 delegates, among whom 4 Dutchmen, whom he invited to a dinner to celebrate the memory of the divine beneficence and of the blessed Zwingli. And in the presence of those 4 Dutchmen, he reports that it was a rich and sumptuous banquet, and speeches, which were many indeed, were heard, affecting no less piety than cheerfulness. And that could have been because of the Dutch, and I see it as a pointer that there are 4 Dutchmen also today present. 5, okay, then we make it 4 because I counted Jan Willem Buisman von Bril to make it 4. But with you it's even more solid. Had the Dutchman Joannes Anastasius Veluanus lived until that day, he would have been precisely 100 years old, and he probably would not have been invited anyhow to Reitinger's banquet, since he was considered to be in mind and spirit on the side of the Remonstrants, and they regarded him as their patriarch, according to Contra-Remonstrant Jacobus Nederland. Nothing of which I have said thus far has anything to do with my lecture. It's just a warming up. Because I would highlight the role of that Dutchman in the Palatinate, born around 1519, between the Netherlands and Zurich. How did it come about that a pastor, a refugee for faith's sake, had landed in the Palatinate, went to Zurich in 1557 or earlier, and had his first work in German published at Thurschauers in this very city? What perspective does this occurrence offer on the trajectories of influence of the Swiss Reformation? I present you a man not well known in Reformation study, yet author of the first Dutch manual on Christian doctrine and ethics, published in the year 1554, entitled Der Leken Wegwijzer, or The Layman's Guide. The author, a Jan Gertzoon Versteeg, had been a village priest in the Duchy of Gelderland and had preached for 6 years in the Reformed way before he was tried for heresy. The statue that you see visualizes his being taken prisoner and brought to justice in Arnhem, where he was sentenced to eternal imprisonment but yielded after 3 years of pressure of Inquisitor Sonion's offer for 3 years theological study course at Louvain University. Verstegen took the bait, but having arrived in Louvain, he eloped and fled for Germany. And it was there that he rewrote the lost manuscript. It was confiscated by the Inquisition of the Leken Wegwijzer, and took on the name Joannes Anastasius, with the addition of Veluanus, John the Resurrected One. Having drifted to the south, he became minister in the villages Steeg and Bacharach in the northern part of the Palatinate of Otheinrich around 1556. And there he began to participate in the debates on Christology and on the Lord's Supper, and published 3 small works until his early death, probably around the year 1570. Well, now, I think the stage is set for the theme of the paper. How did this man become acquainted with the Zurich theologians, and why did he turn to them? What does this imply for the theological influences on the Reformation of the Low Countries? First, I would like to look at that very first work written in Saxon dialect, later translated in Dutch, The Layman's Guide. Below the surface of that book, we encounter elements from Ulrich Zwingli's doctrine of the Lord's Supper. Focusing on John 6 and not so much on the Synoptic Gospels, he teaches that the supper is an image of our daily spiritual eating. On 1 Corinthians 10, he remarks the Lord's Supper is also a Christian banner, veldteken, by which we attest our faith openly before men and testify we are members of Christ's spiritual body. And in the third place, the supper means that we Christians shall be with lively love one body and also serve the others as the members of our natural bodies do, and thus give Christ thanks for his crucified body. These characteristics, which I now only note in passing of Zwingli's doctrine, are superseded by Bulerian tones. Lord's Supper is a sure token, certain waarteken, and a visual confirmation, zichtbaarlijke verzekering, that Christ's merits are transmitted and sealed to the faithful with bread and wine. Yes, his natural body is also transmitted to us in our possession. The unbelievers do not profit from such an offered treasure. Well, this brief overview of Swiss sources in the early development of Joannes Anastasius is simply this: Heinrich Bullinger, against the background of Zwingli, is the Zurich authority in the whole of the Layman's Guide, although these books are still mainly a guide when it comes to historical observations on doctrine, or when it comes to feeding the author with quotations of classical and patristic authors. They were his study books, so to say. My second part is about this first book in German, Vom Nachtmahl Christi. The flight from the Low Countries and his peregrination through Germany landed him in Bacharach and Kolb, and he settled in the office of pastor probably around 56. So Von Nachtmahl Christi was written during Odd Heinrich's name, which tells a lot about how the book was composed. In this Lutheran context, the Dutchman did not even use his adopted name, John Anastasius, but published under the name Adamus Christianus, which is as general as can be, men like Adam, yet a follower of Christ. As the new name, this suddenly mirrors his fall and conviction, his recantation and his remorse. The title of this second work, both of course present here in de Zentrale Bibliothek vom Nachtmahl Christi, Bericht Adami Christiani an die Ständ der Augsburgischen Konfession. And I will go in the rest of the title later. He had it published by Christoph Froschauer before 57. He must have developed context to the city and the printer. A few surviving letters, and I'm thankful to Reinhard Bodemann for helping me in the transcription, reveals the traces of the Zurich connection. As his first book, the author is writing for laymen, the Gottsuchende, verständige Laien, but also now for his colleagues, Kirchendiener in Pfalz. He does not publish in Latin, as a scholar who participates in theological discourse, but more as a theologically self-trained pastor who shares his convictions with his colleagues and disseminates theological knowledge among the people. At the end of Vom Nachtmahl Christi, he calls himself a small, unknown, simple servant of the Church who lives under the honorable authorities of the Augsburg Confession and cannot boast of great learning. Most probably he had no university training. That's the very reason why he published under a pseudonym. If only, says he, the well-known and the learned theologians would speak out. But if they remain silent any longer on the Lord's Supper controversy, says Anastasius, then, quote, soon I will have to jeopardize my service here and publish my thinking under my own name. Well, that's the setting in which Joannes Anastasius published von Nachtmahl Christi, addressing, now focusing more on the title, Die Stände Augsburger Konfession, and he explicates sonderlich an die jetzige Kur und Fürsten in der Pfalz, Sachsen, Hessen und Württemberg, item auch an den Herzogen zu Jülich, etc. Thus, the first among the addressees is the elector of the Palatinate, among his peers in the south and west of the empire. The second edition, still published pseudonymously, is also addressed on the Stände Augsburgische Konfession, but then the rest of the title is abbreviated with etc., not explicating which princes and lands he meant exactly, and that abbreviation was done in his absence, because he was not really involved himself in the finalizing of the second edition. With the address of From Nachtmahl Christi dated March 1557 and the letter to the week of 5 April, we can assume that the author visited Zurich early that year, and its choice to publish in Zurich and his Froschauer indicates that he totally sided with the Swiss theological position on the Lord's Supper and wanted that to be known in fierce debate with Lutheranism, especially as it began raging in the Palatinate. Colleagues in Zurich knew who hid behind the name Adomus Christianus, and they kept it secret. Third part of my lecture this morning, Vermigli's response to a certain friend. This former village priest, educated at the Latin school of his youth, probably did not have, I said it earlier, the chance to study theology. And it is in his works that we can trace the trajectories of self-schooling in the works of the Church Fathers and the various European theologians of his own age. He understood the debates, formulated his own position while looking around himself and familiarizing himself with the religious context of the Palatinate. This method can be illustrated by one page in Vom Nachtmahl Christi, printed between preface and main text. There you have it. It's the only text on one page. The testimonies from the old teachers, Church Fathers quoted in this booklet, can be found in Latin in the Decades of Bullinger, especially in chapters on both natures of Christ, on sacraments, and on the Lord's Supper. Also in Peter Marty's treatise on the Lord's Supper, etc. I mention this to help those who do not have the whole opera patrum in their position. This pointer in the book is meant to make the reader trust the author's use of his sources, as he himself trusted Bullinger and Vermigli to give a fair account of the Patres. And the appeal to the authority of the Church Fathers was of course central to the debate between the emerging confessions. The very first line of the real book is in bold addressed to the civil authorities, quote, in the doctrine of the natural body of Christ, we indeed have Holy Scripture and also old Catholic Christendom fundamentally on our side, as is made clear to you in this booklet. And of course, in Vom Nachtmahl Christi, this debate is focused on Ignazio-Lutheran theology, which developed after the Reformers' death. And I elaborated on that elsewhere, how exactly was the position of Ignazio-Lutheran theology then and there. In the Reformation of the Palatinate, Ott Heinrich proceeded in that Lutheran cause. And then there is that letter from Peter Martin Vermigli to a friend, published as an appendix in the Loci Communes, which may help to see how our Dutchman was connected to Zurich. The addressee, which had written to Vermigli to ask his opinion on a certain most recent confessional statement on the Lord's Supper, which, when you compare the texts, can easily be identified as the doctrinal statement made by Guillaume Farel and Theodore de Beze of May 1557, presented in Göppingen. In his answer, Vermigli addressed his friend as, quote, an excellent man known to me by many names. Well born as Jan Gerritson Verstegen, the Dutchman took on the name of his Protestant confession, Joannes Anastasius, and was about to publish pseudonymously as Adamus Christianus. In April 1558, a year later, his cousin, Gerhardus Garderius Geldrus, also a Dutchman in the Palatinate, you see we are everywhere, he would urge Wellinger, in the meantime I ask, and if that is suited, beseech you in Anastasius and my own name to carefully beware that the true name of Adamus Christianus is revealed to no one, but that you carefully be mindful of the places in which he wanders and the circumstances he circumspectly speaks of until other times comes about. Der Glaubensflüchtling fühlt sich immer wie ein Glaubensflüchtling. Also at the very end of Vermigli's letter we have a hint to the addressee. He calls him, quote, you who need no guide along the way, monstratore. Well, a monstrator is a guide, one who points the way, or a teacher, and the word monstrator is often used when it is about that book, der leken wegwijzer, a monstrator. So Vermigli's church words could mean that he was aware of the identity of Joannes Anastasius as author. The pointer at the beginning of Vom Nacht nach Christi stated that the reader could find the Latin text of patristic references in Bullinger's De Caden and Vermigli's De Coena, which must be the Tractatio de Sacramento Eucharistica, his first publication of London, 1549, which was reprinted in Zurich in 1552 and 1557. Another indication of personal and epistolary contact between the author and the Zurich theological, I would say, market. Indeed, half of the booklet consists of these Zeugnis der alten Lehre, aufrichtig vertäuschet, and indeed, nearly all the quotation can be traced to either Bullinger or Vermigli, which I will demonstrate in the article when it will be published. When Joannes Anastasius writes us, he clarifies we who are called Zwinglians, 1557. And his opponents are always they who always and on every topic want to be sworn servants of Luther, and on the other hand, the Papists. Adamus Christianus presents the true exposition of Zwingli and his followers in this manner. And we can explicate this as, quote, dear reader, this, what I say, is meant by Zwingli, Eucalampaat, Bullinger, Calvin and other pious authors when they call the bread in the supper a hallmark, a seal, or an image of Christ's body. When he pairs Calvinum / Bullingerum, he might even think of the Consensus Tigurinus of 49. Joannes Anastasius, writing as Adamus Christianus, ends his pamphlet by suggesting strategic means to his readers to get to the bottom of the truth. He recommends the reading of the best polemical writings, quote, at the Zurich side, that is the Zwinglian side. One should peruse the De Canis of Bullinger and the Institutio of John Calvin. For the opinion of the worthy man of God, Zwingli and Eucalampaat has been expounded by them very adequately. Also, one should read the books of John Lesko and Peter Vermigli. End quote. At the end of this pamphlet, the author recommends that princes who have no command of Latin or are not able to read the longer text to have themselves instructed by learned men from both sides. The prince should then order repeated disputations between these two parties and he assures the overlords that the learned church servants on our side are ready to partake in such a friendly collation. Near the end, Vom Nacht nach Christi, our pseudonymous author appeals very strongly to Philip Melanchthon to take sides. He writes of people, quote, who think that the main author of the Augsburg Confession had already earlier recognized the truth secretly, and the words of the Lord's Supper also had been written by him diligently, end quote. Adrian's Christianus is not sure if that rumor is true, but he is sure that, quote, Philip for many years, even while Luther was alive, had known better and still remained silent for peace sake or for either other reason, but with a troubled conscience, end quote. And then the punchline is, I do hope that from now on, Philip will no longer keep silent, but speak his mind freely, as he owes it to Christ and to the troubled churches to do, end quote. Now, well, this is the background against which it must have been a joy for John Anastasius when Frederick III asked Melanchthon's advice in 1559, and when the latter wrote his Judicium Decena Domini, and when it was made public in Heidelberg in 1560 on the authority of the prince, Anastasius prepared his own German translation to advertise the deceased Melanchthon's advice to the Palatinate. My fourth section, doctrinal sensitivity surrounding the second edition of Vom Nachtmahl Christi. It must have been somewhat successful, for a second edition was printed only 2 years later. Although the title page does not mention publisher and year, it is not so difficult to pinpoint the date of publication as no later than 59. Anastasius' text was not simply reprinted. The first 8 pages were set anew to make room for the insertion of a highly significant addition. As I already said, the title for Armas Christiane Vom Nachtmahl Christi remained the same, although the subtitle was shortened. The first part of the book offers an impression of Luther's teaching on the ubiquity of Christ's body, and then positively rounding up an exposition of Luther's position, Anastasius states, and then comes a new text. I translate, the wholesome power of Christ's body and blood reaches out each day from heaven to me on earth. But to the second edition, the following 8 lines of print have been squeezed in the text. And when I speak now and later of the life-giving power coming and proceeding from Christ's flesh and blood, I do not speak of his flesh and blood as of only a common and ordinary human, but of he who does have his real flesh, but united with eternal divinity, from which stems all life, as also St. Cyril writes in Book 4 of John, chapter 14, and in Book 11, chapter 21. Well, reference to Cyril's commentary on the Gospel of John is in line with the very opening of his book by Anastasia, but the quote as such is not Anastasius' style, and a letter from Heinrich Bullinger may shed light on this added sentence. A letter to Bullinger, it was written 10 April 1558 by his cousin. The Zürich Antistes had communicated through publisher Froschauer and cousin Gerhardus some questions that had arisen in Zürich concerning the 1557 edition of Vom Nachtmahl Christi. Gerhardus reports Froschauer had informed him that Wolfgang Musculus and other men renowned in learning and piety want to see I do not know what changed in the book. And in the meantime, the author Anastasius had promised to react soon, quote, on the matter of controversy with confirmation or denial according to the very truth, quite misty still. Yet from the sole surviving letter from Anastasius himself to Bullinger, dating from the year 1567, that is 9 years later, it becomes clear that the author did not live up to his promise and did not answer what to correct in his own book. because then 9 years later he apologizes for not having answered. And so it can be assumed that Froschauer, instructed by Bullinger, inserted the said 9 lines in the second edition, thereby averting a too Lutheran reading of Vom Nachtmahl Christi. Bullinger's intervention made the second edition of this work possible. As I said, the second edition was probably published in 59, because after Gerhardter's letter to Bullinger, they probably waited some time before it became evident that no reaction from the author was forthcoming. Terminus ante quem must be April 1560, because then a certain Johannes Knippius Andronicus, teacher of the Latin school of Frankfurt am Main, wrote a work of his own, initially in German, to be translated into Latin. And then he says, quote, "If only someone would be deemed worthy to arrange it better and to correct it, even add or delete things, as has been done with the book by Adamus Christianus." Well, when Knippius had knowledge of the added lines in the second edition in early 5060, then the book appeared before that. Did the author send a copy to Philomenaton himself? The letter referred to Vom Nachtmahl Christi in a letter from 1559, in which he wrote, quote, "I have heard of this unholy bickering," I take it in Zurich, "through the book of Mr. Adamus," unquote. So, Philomenaton was not unprepared to receive a request for help in confessional collisions in the Palatinate in that very same year. My final paragraph is paragraph 5, coming clean with Bullinger. In 59, Frederick III succeeded of Heinrich as elector of the Palatinate and sought indeed the advice of Melanchthon in the controversy on the Lord's Supper, in which especially Wilhelm Klebitz and Tilleman Heshusen clashed violently. The elector sought the speedy publication of the Judicium de Controversia Coeli Domini against the protest of the Lutheran faction of the Heidelberg University. Then the pastor of Bacharach shed his cloak of pseudonymity and published his third work, his Bekanntnis Joannes Anastasius von dem wahren Leib Christi of 61. In his pamphlet he explicitly stated, again writing on the true body of Christ, quote, and he says more or less the same as he said on Luther and Vermitli quotes in the former book, also the old doctors Cyrillus, Vigilius, Theodoretus, Fulgentius are in agreement with Augustine in this doctrine, as I have pointed out from their writings to the simple yet studious layman in Adamus Christianus, as he calls the book. Well, in the same year, Frederick III promoted him to the rank of superintendent in Amt Bacharach. It was in that capacity that he must have taken part in the Synod of 63, in which the Heidelberg Catechism was read and signed. While he was not among the authors, as one of the 9 superintendents, I like to call him a Dutch godfather of the Heidelberg Catechism. And elsewhere, I've argued that John Anastasius had earlier composed his own catechism to replace the Lutheran ones by Brentz and Luther, and used it to teach in Amt Bacharach, but that he put that work aside when Frederick III ordered the Heidelberg Catechism to be taught. It was only later, before his death, that he edited the manuscript, not with the title of a catechism, but as the Alte Katholische Laienbücher, published in 1566 as a defense for the Reformation in the Palatinate, which stood trial on the Diet of Augsburg of that year. Then the last surviving document of his life is that one surviving letter to Bullinger dating from September 67. A long, long letter in which he apologized himself, but also wrote extensively on the events, the dramatic events in Brussels, when the Duke of Alva had arrested Philip of Montmorency, Count of Hoorn, and also Lamoral, Count of Egmont, the counts of Egmond and Horne would be executed soon, and my account of Egmond was brother-in-law to Frederick III, married to the latter's sister Sabine von Pfalz-Zimmern. This harsh policy, ordered by Philip II, was meant to replace the hesitant policy of his half-sister Margaret as governors of the Low Countries, and to break the resistance of the nobles in Flanders. Well, we can imagine how Joannes Anastasius, feeling himself always as a refugee who had to hide, used his personal network to provide even the elector in Heidelberg and even the antistes in Zurich with news from the Low Countries to keep them up to date. While spreading such news to Zurich, Anastasius finally excused himself profusely for not having responded to the criticism in Zurich on the first edition of Von Nacht Christi. Quote, "On your letter, most excellent sir, given to me regarding Adamus Christianus, when it was printed for the first time in Zurich, I should have responded 8 years ago." When Bullinger received the letter, he wrote on the cover, Joannes Anastasius, who is also Adamus Christianus. Regarding their relation, the Dutchman wrote, quote, "I further beseech you to believe me that this is the truth. Although I have not written you anything, grateful memory has not been extinguished in my heart. Often have I been in prayer before God for your total happiness in Christ, and I have read and still read your works eagerly, and I look at your letters, in which you have been so kind to offer me your friendship, often, and I read them in your memory." Conclusions. Having traced Anastasius' relation to Zurich, we can conclude that he had already been influenced in general by a Zwinglian theology of the sacraments in his younger years. And mind you, we are speaking here of the long age of the Reformation in the Netherlands, where everything was underground until around 1570, that late. So the Layman's Guide has only one direct reference to Zwingli, in Catabates Testarum Strophas Elendas, and it's a more or less historical quote. But both Heinrich Bullinger and John Calvin are authorities on an equal footing and without any distinction. In his pseudonymous Von Nacht Christi, the Dutchman attached himself even closer to Zurich, now also vermeekly, although most probably not on the doctrine of predestination, but that's another chapter. When Musculus offered objections, Bullinger intervened and cleared the way for the second edition. While engaging in the debate between Ignatio-Lutherans and Philippists, Anastasius was already strategically thinking of the confessional course of the Palatinate, and soon after the publication of the second edition of Von Nacht, Frederick III would choose a more Calvinist Bulgarian course. While working in a Palatinate and connecting to Zurich, Anastasius maintained contact with the Low Countries and relayed news in his network of visitors and letters, schoolmen and pastors. Layman's Guide became a popular and influential book there. We have no indication, however, that his later works, all written in German and influenced by Zurich, were connected to his name in his country of birth. But also his affiliation in the emerging Heidelberg Catechism does not seem to have been known in his home country, where the Reformed churches would adopt that catechism in 71. Yet, as preacher and superintendent in the Palatinate, Joannes Anastasius was present at the birth, presentation and years of implementation of the Heidelberg Catechism and its defense. His theological identification with theologians like Heinrich Bullinger and his personal connections to Zurich underline, in my opinion, the influence from Zurich on that catechism, and that is the route along which the theology of Zurich would enter the Low Countries in a deep and broad running current. Thank you for listening.